Thank you very much for coming and for joining us here in this joint GEF and GCF Pavilion. It is an honor for us to jointly organize this event, to publicly announce the joint framework of collaboration between the GEF and the GCF that will strengthen our long-term collaboration, cooperation, and complementarity. For this, I'm very pleased. I'm Carolina Fuentes from the GCF, and I will be pleased to co-moderate this session with my colleague Gustavo Fonseca from the GEF. And we'll be hearing from different stakeholders of the GEF and the GCF about the framework on complementarity and coherence that gives shape to our long-term vision. For that, we'll hear from Yannick Glemarek and from Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, the heads of the two organizations, followed as well by country representatives here, our distinguished panel, composed by Ornella Cucci, a minister from Albania. We also have the Deputy Secretary from Timor-Leste, and we also have advisor to the minister from Costa Rica. Many thanks for your presence here. After the panel, a round of applause. Many thanks for that. After the panel, we'll hear also from the accredited entities when it comes to implementation, and we'll hear also some remarks from the UNFCCC. That is the program for the day. But just to say that it is not by chance, it is not by coincidence that we're sharing this pavilion with the GEF. This is a demonstration of the joint work that we undertake in supporting climate action in developing countries. We are also having a program of events throughout these 2 weeks at COP that demonstrate as well the efforts that we are undertaking jointly in serving the countries to the Convention and to the Paris Agreement. So many thanks to you all, so you can hear from this joint framework of collaboration. And for that, now I'll give the floor to Mr. Yannick Glemarek. Thank you, Yannick.
Thank you very much, Carolina. Actually, Carlos Manuel and I, we had just a slight discussion to know which of the two of us was the eldest. And he beats me by a very short.
So it will be age before beauty.
That would be wisdom. It's deference to wisdom.
Well, thank you so much, Yannick and Carolina. Thank you so much, and welcome everybody to our joint pavilion. This is your house, definitely. Whatever you need, we are here. Yes, it is not coincidence that we are here working together and launching this long-term vision for complementarity. More and more, we really understand that the way we have designed our agencies, our governments, the way we have designed even our conventions, the way we have designed the instruments to implement our conventions works on sectors. And even though we've been relatively successful in achieving progress on each of these sectors, we are not moving the needle as fast and as strong and as consistent as we need. I used to work with government, and the biggest challenge as a government minister was aligning my vision or the sustainability vision within all sectors and all ministers. And yes, definitely, my biggest challenge was the vision of that other minister that had probably short-term goals and targets, but his institution was generating policies and providing financing activities that were contributing to climate change and biodiversity loss. Nevertheless, all public indicators were saying that he was providing jobs, income, and growth. And my system was telling me that his policies and his investment were generating more emissions, more biodiversity loss, and more pollution. We learned the hard way that we need to not just to plan in a more coherent manner, but also began questioning the way we have a structure, how we operate. And more integration and more complementarity is needed. A few years ago, the most important politicians that attended these meetings were the ministers of environment. and forgive my colleagues, ministers of environment, thank God they are not anymore the most important politicians attending this. That is a proof that we're doing progress in terms of this full integration going across all different sectors. And I can say the same thing with the different global environmental conventions. We did a convention for land degradation, another for nature conservation, another for climate change, and others for trade on wildlife, water, wetlands and migratory species, chemicals and waste, and we've been working on all of them through many different approaches, designing, proposing solutions at the country level, but working on silos and on sectors. And more we have understood through the trial and error and learning by doing that every single investment in biodiversity has climate benefits. Every single investment in climate mitigation has adaptation benefits. Every time we take out of the environment mercury and PCBs and hazardous substances, we are contributing to revert the rate of climate change. And that is why the GEF is moving towards a more integrated approach where we will be allowing countries to use in a more flexible way the resources allocated for each of the conventions. And this is why we, the funds, are responding in a very strategic manner, in a very coherent manner, with a long-term vision on how we complement. And this is, I will say, a great news as personally as head of the GEF, but also as a person who is really committed with developing countries. When I was a minister, I accessed GEF funds and Green Climate funds without any possibility to blend them in a way that I can be able to foresee what will be the end result in 10 and 15 years. With this, I think that we will be in an excellent position to help and assist those countries in more integration as the funds will work more integrated with a long-term vision. You can begin with accessing funds of the GEF relatively fast, 18 months if that is, that can be not less than 18 months, 12 to 18 months, doing the innovation, the piloting, creating the enabling conditions, and then the Green Climate Fund can come and give that, transformational approach, that amplification and upscaling in a way that can really begin moving the needle. That complementarity is an effort that we see. And we see that happening in many regions within the land and the ocean. Today, I'm extremely glad to be part of this effort where we are launching these initiatives. So thank you so much for joining us. We will have a very, very interesting panel with the experts and decision makers from recipient countries of the Green Climate Fund and the GEF. Over to you, Yannick.
Many, many thanks, Carlos Manuel. I remember the first time I read the expression, the race to net zero. And I could understand that it was a race between climate change and our efforts. But in terms of a race, if you look at those who basically compete in this race, it's a race that can only be won if everybody cross the finishing line. The days where we could have won such a race with only 10 or 20 or 50 countries crossing the finishing line is over. Now every single country has to cross the finishing line. And it's a problem of mandatory solidarity. Every single country has to cooperate, has to support each other. And that's the same also increasingly for industries. In hard-to-abate sectors, for example, we have no choice but collaboration. We have to collaborate to come with some solution within the next 10 years. And this call for collaboration has to be also mirrored by institutions. Institutions also have to learn to work as one. And the Global Environment Fund and the Green Climate Fund have actually a unique comparative advantage. We are hubs, we are partnership organizations. we do not develop and implement our own projects. We co-originate, we co-develop, we co-finance projects of other institutions. We are basically hubs. We are right now the hubs of the entire climate finance landscape. We work with established organizations, often much, much larger than us. And what we do is that we help them in originating their first climate projects, and we help them in reducing the risk of taking on a new business by co-financing and de-risking the early intervention. And as hub, we have also a key role to transfer knowledge. And one innovation that's happened here can be very quickly transferred to somewhere else through a hub. And so if you bring the two hubs of the climate finance world, GEF and GCF together, you get basically something completely unique. You get a very integrated and connected financial landscape. And that's the promise for me of this long-term vision. And so in terms of the main objective of this long-term vision, it's basically first to move increasingly toward joint programming. So that's GEF and GCF basically share their analysis and do not oblige governments to repeat twice the same thing. Where you prepare a report for GEF, you prepare a report for GCF. And on the opposite, we basically become syndicators. We can help government in identifying what are the different sources of finance, the different partners we can call on to realize their climate ambition. We also, if we can bring together what we have learned on what works, what does not work, we can dramatically accelerate the replication of potentially good solutions for different countries. And when we know that there's very little thing new in the world. But that doesn't matter what you do, somebody has already done it. The issue is often making sure that people are aware about it, and it's communicating it in a way that everybody can understand. And so for me, a third key promise of this long-term vision is that the two funds can basically come together to be able to share their communication and outreach initiatives and join hands in these efforts. If we can fulfill the promise of the long-term vision, we will dramatically improve the quality of the services we provide to the countries that we serve. And for me, it's almost an ethical, a moral imperative for these two funds to work as one in order to make sure that we do not waste 1 minute, we do not waste 1 penny in our fight for climate change. And I'm personally delighted that we have been able to share our pavilion for the last 2 years. To begin with, because a lot of people are asking this question. So this every time gives us an opportunity to explain why we thought that it was so important. And Carlos, Manuel, and I, we are not exactly twin. But in terms of coherence and complementarity, we thought about a new initiatives. And we have a color coherent and well-coordinated mask. So this one has been prepared by GCF for GEF. This one is for GEF, and this one is for GCF. And so that we will be further coherent and coordinated. Yeah. Or maybe I should say it's because before we give the time the floor to the UNFCCC secretariat. It's also a response to a demand from the COP. That's the COP at COP21, COP23 have been very clear about it, and we have heard them.
Thank you very much, Carlos Manuel, and thank you, Yannick, for introducing the long-term vision. This is a very significant moment for the two institutions because before today, this was basically the work that we were undertaking behind the scenes in designing the initiative. But now, for the first time, we're also announcing this initiative to the world, and that is our stakeholders, the countries, of course, the entities, and the final beneficiaries of climate action supported by GEF and by GCF jointly. Many thanks for those efforts and for joining forces in the benefit of climate action. With that, now we move to the discussion panel, and I'm very honored to introduce Mrs. Ornella Cusci, Deputy Minister from the Ministry, my apologies, from the Ministry of Tourism and Environment of Albania. Many thanks, Ornella.
Thank you very much, Carolina. Hello to everybody. And I am representing here Balkan. I don't know if you have heard about Balkan. It's a small peninsula, but a turbulent area. And I believe that you have heard of its big problems and at different times. So what you have not heard, for sure, it's that in this small area, we have so many big importance. Our nature has a big importance because we have the 1/3 of the flora and fauna for Europe. We are sharing our small countries. We are sharing this very big value of nature. And in the same time, we have a very big list of protected species in our countries. So, but if you know Balkans, they are small countries with big problems and for sure small budgets. And in the environmental issues, they are smaller and smaller and smaller. So, for example, in my country, in Albania, we have approximately 1% every year of our annual budget as government for the environmental issues. And we are the Ministry of Tourism and Environment. These very big, two important issues on our government, but with a smaller budget. And only for this, GEF and GCF together, they are big opportunities for us. Because without budgets, we can talk and we can make policies, but without implementation. And Carlos Manuel talked about ministers and how important is the policies and the ministers of the environment in our countries. No, they are not important, for sure. In the meantime, they are coming in some countries, they are coming from small parties and coalitions. So they are only some favors do it from the governments or from the prime ministers to the small parties. So in this case, 100% for our GDP is coming from nature, using the environmental assets. And the governments need to understand that the environment is very important. And why to collaborate on this? And why to collaborate on together, GEF and GCF in our countries? Because as I said, it's a big opportunity. And it's big budgets for our small budgets, annual budgets as governments. So firstly, for not duplicating the projects. The agencies, they are doing the same projects for the same issues, different projects for the same issues. So we are losing these opportunities and we are losing these budgets, these funds. In the meantime, for having together this big puzzle, the government is doing something, the local government is doing something else, the entities, they are doing something else with the participation, with the foundation of GEF and GCF. And in the meantime, the small entities, they are doing something else. If we don't have all these small pieces of this puzzle together, we can't have a good overview of what we are doing for the environment in our small countries. And finally, find the way how to be all together on this. The government, the private sector, and the university, the academians, the golden helix. And if we are not together, we as government, we can make policies with the help of, and we can create laws, and we can create strategies, but without implementation. In this time, in this year, we have approximately in my country, translate almost all the European legislation, but And we have almost 80% of our legislation, of the European legislation, is transposed in my country. But only 10% of this is implemented. So with this very big and huge gap between the transposition and the implementation, we should work on this for not having this big gap and for creating big initiatives. But without the private sector, we can do nothing. We are just talking and we are just creating laws and strategies without implementation. So the private sector should be not our implementer, but our partner on this. And in this case, without the private sector and without considering the private sector as our partner on this implementation, we can't do something, for sure. And for this, I think GEF and GCF together can collaborate even for our countries to find the way how to help the private sector to contribute more on the environmental issues and on our green agenda. And lastly, the universities. Yes, we are working a lot without sustainability, because we are buying expertise from the biggest country. So now in Albania, we are implementing German laws for the the Albanian reality. How to implement all this without our own expertise, without creating our own expertise. In my country, we don't have, and in all Balkans, we don't have a single one bachelor on climate change, a single one master degree on climate change. How to build our own strategies and how to implement our own strategies without experts. So we are buying this expertise with the help of your projects, but without creating our own sustainability on how to implement these strategies. And for this, I think we should have our joint initiatives. And I know that it's very, very hard to work on joint initiatives and on regional initiatives. It's very hard to work and create our own projects for GEF or for GCF. I know how complicated the whole procedure and how bureaucratic the whole procedure is. And to think about the regionalization, yes, we have to think for 6 countries, for example, with the same bureaucratic process, and for convincing six NDAs or 6 operational focal points for having a single project. It's very hard. And in the meantime, they will change because the governments, they are changing. And in the meantime, the politics, they are changing. And the persons who works at the ministries, they are changing. So I think that our work now is to have institutionalization of the NDAs and the operational focal points. Without this, we can just create having some projects for implementation, but with the changing of these persons, because they are single persons at our ministries, we will change the whole importance of these priorities on our governments. So this is my proposal, and this I think will be a must for creating the institutionalization of both these persons, but as institutions now, and the collaboration on the basis level between the operational focal points and the NDAs should be a must for your collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ornella, for bringing the perspective of the Balkans and also how this collaboration between the GEF and the GCF can support countries in the region, both in terms of enhancing the coordination also at the national level between different stakeholders, but also in terms of bringing from the design at the policy level to the implementation at the operational level, and that is something where both the GEF and the GCF can bring in expertise. Very good to hear that from you, Ornella. Many thanks. On that note, let's go to our next speaker. We are honored also with the presence of Mr. Demetrio Amaral de Carvalho, State Secretary for Timor-Leste. Thank you.
Thank you for the time. First of all, I would like to congratulate GEF and GCF for your joint collaborations to define our long-term visions, to be able to use a financial mechanism better to solve our Mother Earth problems. when we're talking about financial mechanisms, we human beings create our own procedure to tackle environmental problems, while nature has its own rules. We can't negotiate it with rules. We are rationed by time to face the death sentences from our Mother Earth. That's why the joint collaborations of these two financial institutions is very important in terms of redefined our collaborations and partnership principles, and in the same time to redesign the systems not to burden our process in terms of project formulations up to implementations. I want to again do reflections based on Timor-Leste case. I think also can reflect to the LDCs groups, 46 countries in LDCs. I think we have the same conditions. First, I think the joining collaboration between these two institutions need to taking account to the system implementations, simplify the mechanisms. In the same time, make sure that country beneficiaries also accomplish accountability in the implementations. Make sure that the process integrated principles that we want to apply to save our Mother Earth. Today, we all understand that nature-based solutions can be an option. Circular economy can be an option. These all can be formulated in new framework to help our long-term visions to achieve better our serve to protect our planet. In the same time, we all understand that every single country has their own policy mechanism. In Timor-Leste cases, we have our foreign policy. We have what we call country-owned, country-driven country system. So this also may be applied by other LDC's country and other benefit country. I think this needs to be considered by GEF and GCF in terms of when we design our transitioning process from accredited entity to direct access beyond country members. We understand that GCF apply deploy readiness funds, and now I hear enhancing capacity for direct access. These all can help country member to be able to move from to be able to be part of direct access in the future implementation of both GF and GCF. In terms of our rations against times, very important for us also to do financial mechanism, follow the nature procedures. We all understand that nature-based solution can overlap country, can be sub-nation, but also can cross-border issues. This is need GCF and GF to facilitate dialogue between beneficiaries countries to be able to develop joint actions in terms of eco-region project or futures bio-regional project that overcome or to that can involve more than 2 or 3 nations in terms of giving solution to our Mother Earth, related to oceans, related to circular economy, or related to climate change specific topic. Others, I think, in terms of helping countries like LDCs, we all have the similar conditions facing. When we do project development, we have to find a project development specialist. And sometimes this also became a barrier for the process. And I think I would like to see in the future these two institutions have similar accreditation to potential consultant agency that they recommended to country beneficiaries for quick access consultant for project development. I think these few things that I want to highlight. Again, on behalf of the LDC's country, congratulations for your long-term visions, joint collaborations. Thank you.
Many thanks for bringing the perspective of LDCs and also for welcoming the collaboration between the entities of the financial mechanism. That is key as well to bring to life the actions that the countries are pledging in the context of the NDCs. And we hope and we will work towards that aim in supporting countries bringing and translating their actions into very concrete investments and projects. Also, we appreciate that you note the support that can be given at the different stages of the project development cycle, from the design to the implementation and in different sectors. And we also note, both from Ornella and from you as well, the relevance of having expert advice and having joint coordination as well when it comes to the provision of support, technical and expert advice. This is very helpful because this will help inform as well as we further shape our long-term collaboration. And many thanks for that. Last but not least, we have Ricardo Ulate, advisor to the Minister of Costa Rica. Thank you for letting us know the opportunities that you see in this long-term vision strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to the GEF and the GCF for inviting Costa Rica to provide also some views on our experience, but not just on our experience, but on the challenges that we see ahead. Because this is something that should not be only seen as a global effort. It should be, very concretely being implemented at the national level. It's the only way to ensure that there is going to be coherence and complementarity. And to start, I will say that in Costa Rica, for some years now, we realized that climate change was not just an environmental problem. That was a development issue that needed to be addressed in a very different way as it used to be, addressed at the beginning of all the negotiations and discussions on climate change. And in recognizing that, of course, we started to connect the different sectors of the national policy planning. We started to connect the different stakeholders, the economic and social actors toward that end. And we are near, but not yet there, to really use the climate change challenges and climate change policy framework as the central element for the national development plans. Climate change, including in the context of the SDGs, somehow will need, to become being the core of the national development policies. Because, as Mr. Carlos Manuel mentioned, there is no option, to continue working just on silos and in a sectoral way. There is going to be a lot of competition for public funding and investment. There is going to be more confusion for the private sector, in order to follow a kind of clear guidance by the country goals and targets. All planning sectors and all stakeholders should be there. Because the climate change is affecting at every sector and every actor in the national economy. And this is, the first element to take into account. The second element is that we cannot continue planning for climate change on the short and medium term. Climate change is a long-term problem that requires long-term solutions. In a government that lasts 4 or 5 years, it is impossible to provide any solution to the challenges of climate change. That's why we also recognize, and this is something interesting that derived from the Paris Agreement, that not many countries have really understood. We realized that there was this need to start planning on the long term. And the Paris Agreement already calls for developing long-term, low-carbon development strategies. We started the process, we invited all sectors, we convoked all the different agencies and ministries, and developed the National Decarbonization Plan for Costa Rica, which is our long-term vision and was conveyed to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is our framework for 2050 and beyond. There are the goals for 2050 and for 2100. There is a clear path. There are, of course, focus on the concrete and short-term challenges, like the transport sector and in the agricultural sector in the case of Costa Rica, that can vary depending on the country. But we have now, a path forward for the long term. And importantly, the citizenship in Costa Rica is starting to understand that climate change is a challenge for all and that needs also, long-term commitments, and that everyone has a role to play on that. The National Decarbonization Plan includes all sectors. It includes a balanced approach between mitigation and adaptation action. It's also a framework to articulate the sectoral policies from different governmental agencies. And something really important is that it links directly the plan and the policies and actions with a very clear investment plan. And in this case, for instance, the connections and the articulation and the coherence between the National Decarbonization Plan and the role of the Ministry of Finance is going to be critical. Because many of these key actors in our national development structures, governments, have to be fully embedded and aware of what climate change is and what their role is in the long term. My third element, and not only as an official of the Costa Rican delegation, but as in my former role as GEF focal point some years ago, I think that there are still a lot of challenges to be addressed, and this initiative could really provide room to improve the capacities at the country levels. First, all countries have probably, as far as I know, different focal points for the GCF and for the GEF. And there are a lot of different focal points for all the different conventions. And most times they don't talk to each other. So we need to articulate that. And the way to articulate that, in my view, is the National Decarbonization Plan. We have now a path. We have now a goal, a target to follow, and all these, operational and political focal points need to start organizing toward achieving that and following that path. So I really celebrate this initiative because it's a step forward in that regard. But of course, there are still many elements to be addressed. One is, for instance, the constituencies in the representation of the GEF in the different assemblies, that also need to be somehow reconsidered and tried at least to get the coherence concept all the way, since the global elements until the national level. And finally, I think that it is time that the private sector start to be integrated into all this process, including the structures of the focal points at the national level, because they are part of the solution also. Thank you very much.
Ricardo, many thanks for your intervention. That, of course, is full of very useful takeaways for us. Among them, the importance also to build a long-term decarbonization plan that has climate change at the core. And around that plan, we have different stakeholders supporting implementation, among them GEF and GCF. And also, thanks for stressing the relevance of complementarity and coherence for the organizations, but most importantly, for the countries. That is relevant, very relevant for us. Some of the aspects that we hear as well and that will further fit into our complementarity framework are the need to provide the support to transition from policy building to implementation. I think that came through in all the interventions from the panel members. Another very important point is with regard to the expert input and technical support and how we best collaborate as GEF and GCF to coordinate that kind of support to countries that can make the difference in bringing projects to implementation. And the need for focal points to collaborate more closely. So we take this on board, and we'll be also taking action on this framework and also informing constantly on the progress made. Many thanks, distinguished panelists. Thank you, Yannick, and thank you, Carlos Manuel, as well, for all the remarks and for introducing this framework and for the public announcement. Now the framework is with you to go towards implementation. We move now to the second part of this session. That is with regards to the role of accredited entities. And for that, I'll give the floor to my colleague, Gustavo Fonseca, who will continue the moderation of the panel. Many thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we heard a lot up to this point in this panel. I think there's a lot of goodwill that has been expressed here. We are all in favor of breaking silos. We are all in favor of integration. We are in favor of integrating across sectors. We are in favor of, in our long race for the global environment and for climate change, we leave no runner behind, and we all cross the line. We are all in favor of a resource programming that's done jointly, and that can be done also across borders, across regions. We also very interested in avoiding duplication and creating synergies across these funds. We learned that it doesn't really help to go alone, and we need the private sector, we need to engage science, we need to engage local institutions if this is going to work at the end of the day. We need to work on our own systems. We need to reform the way that we approach countries and allow them to have access to resources. This involves changing accreditation or harmonizing accreditation processes. This passes through reforms in the way that we are governed, because the governing bodies are different, and that's another challenge that we need to face. We also need to learn how to integrate even amongst themselves, and we heard from our friend from Timor-Leste about their status as an LDCs, and we can't allow countries that have less capacity to be left out of the race towards climate change and towards nature protection. They need to really be a focus of work that is really addressing their needs and their capacities and their context. So we need to be able to bring them in as well. And we heard from our colleague from Costa Rica that without making this work at the national level, no matter what Carlos Manuel and Yannick want to do at our level, it's not going to work. And this brings me to the second part of this panel, which is how do we actually do this in practice? Because even if we were fully integrated at the global level, even if our resources were from one source, even if our processes were fully coherent, we still depend on agencies, we still depend on national executing entities, we still depend on cross-sectoral integration, private sector. So how do we do all of this? And let me start for the second part of this panel to address the second layer of this equation, because what we do, we are not implementers of projects, we are funders of projects. We provide funding, we all fundraise with our donors, and then we distribute the money to countries. So we need here to be able to talk to the agencies that are part of this process and get their perspectives. We have 18 agencies in the GEF, and I think GCF has more than 100 and growing. So we would like to hear some of the testimonies that we can get and the perspectives that we can get from the agencies. So we understand that I have IFAD here. Jenny, is Jenny here? Jenny, hi. I didn't recognize you behind the mask. Come on. So Jenny Rio is from IFAD, which is one of the implementing agencies of both GCF and the GEF. And your perspective will be greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much, Gustavo, and really interesting session. And I think from IFAD's side, we definitely welcome that vision, and we look forward to work with both funds on implementing it. Definitely, that can be. I mean, we've heard about how to, the importance of breaking silos, of blending funds. So definitely, we think that can help, and not, silos at different level, because also within agencies, there's often different management of the funds, and also within countries. So that's will be within the the details or to go about that. But from IFAD's side, at least the two funds, even the three funds, but adaptation fund are in the same division. So we're already quite working together, and often seeing what we're doing in with countries, and how that can go into more alignment, more synergies, and we've been discussing that also with some countries. And I think there's interest and readiness for that also from the countryside. So yeah, we're really looking for that, and we have this like concrete example for the Great Green Wall that we are developing a kind of support umbrella program with the GCF, and also interacting quite a lot with the GEF on it. And we've been trying to during the consultation as well and the design, to discuss with also the operational focal point of the GEF and the NDAs. Sometimes they're the same, not always, and trying to bring, to already have this during the design phase, and not, and we've included activities and implementation that would also foster that coordination, that collaboration. So hopefully that will be a good examples. We hope so, and another activities that we've been working quite a lot with the GEF in the last more than a decade. We've been working closely with Indonesian peatland restoration, sustainable land management, sustainable peatland management, and that's also something we think could be, could be upscale, or could be with different financial instruments with the GCF. So, yeah, so we definitely welcome and see. Of course, the devils will be in the details. We see it already with, with a bit of the Great Green Wall in terms of, the programming are a little bit done differently, as well as, of course, the, indicators tracking to reporting. So, yeah, what can be done to better harmonize would be good, and hopefully we'll be part of the next step that were mentioned earlier. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Let's now hear from an NGO, which is an implementing agency of both funds as well, from World Wildlife Fund. Jenny, please stay, unless you have to rush somewhere. Dave Macaulay from WWF will present the perspectives from the institution that he represents here, which is very different from, let's say, IFAD, or from an MDB, or from a UN agency, and what you guys bring to this question, and how you can help us solve this conundrum and get us to where we need to be. David, please.
Easier. Thank you. Let's just do that. Pleasure to be here. And, you know, you're talking about differences. And I was going to say something about that, actually, at the outset, is that, you know, when we talk about trying to find the comparative advantage of GEF and GCF and how they can complement one another, in essence, those differences become an advantage. They become a positive, right? And so we've heard from the previous panel about some of those characteristics where GEF, in terms of its flexibility and its integrated approach and its long attention to knowledge development, knowledge sharing, knowledge management, brings that. And GCF, not exactly the new kid on the block. They've been around for a little while now, but they obviously bring real attention to transformative change with a bigger scale of financing. They are very geared to the private sector, although GEF, of course, has long experience. Some of it, well, a lot of lessons in working with the private sector to share with GCF. And finally, GCF, of course, is very focused on climate benefits, but I think beginning to recognize the interdependencies that Carlos Manuel mentioned in terms of the nature-based solutions and everything else that connects the dots amongst the different elements of climate approaches, both mitigation and adaptation. So I think going forward, it's really exciting. I commend from WWF and from other fellow GEF agencies and GCF entities. You know, we can commend this effort, and there's a lot of work yet to be done. Obviously, whether it's on the agencies themselves are not one for one, so we have to see how that works. There's GCF is still struggling to get through its board a policy paper on programmatic approaches. So, you know, we can talk about joint programming, but it's hindered somewhat by the lack of a clear direction from the GCF board, whereas GEF has been at this for a very long time. The metrics and results frameworks, I think the countries would really welcome stronger attention to common frameworks there. The blended finance modalities, what counts as co-financing, the attention to leveraging, and finally the sort of proposals and application process, as we heard from both of our colleagues. You know, in the U.S. a few years ago, they managed to, for the college application processes in the United States up until, what, about 15 years ago or so, every university had its own application process. And you had to write, if you had college-age students, you had to write separate essays for every university, and you know, they were all variations on a theme. And then you had all those other application processes. So I recognize it may be a little bit of a high bar for GEF and GCF and Adaptation Fund and others to come up with but something along those lines would certainly be very welcome by the partner countries. So let's see where that might go. Finally, just from WWF standpoint, you know, we are very focused. Certainly, it's the core of our work with GCF around nature-based solutions, and for years with GEF similarly. And there are all kinds of opportunities there for joint programming. I think largely based around ecosystems. We have one where we're already doing joint programming. We have GEF Council approved Coral Reef Initiative, $7 million for 7 countries, and we're using that to develop the policy and enabling conditions in the investment framework for GCF financing to come in behind in countries like Fiji and Solomon Islands. And I think other sorts of ecosystem-based approaches for wetlands, where we have a GCF project in Pakistan that can complement and in protected areas management, where Bhutan for Life, we've done joint programming already, and you know, grasslands and mangroves, and the list goes on. So I see huge potential here, and I'm sorry to go on, but I am excited about this work. Thanks.
Thank you very much, David. great enthusiasm and a lot of work ahead of us. I would like now to call on one accredited agency of the GCF, but it's a national agency. So this is another typology that we also have. So René Gonzalez, is he here? I saw him.
She's in remote manner.
Oh,
Right
oh, remote.
Virtually.
Oh, that's right.
There
Thank
René.
you.
Okay. Hello, René.
Hi there.
I have to look up, okay? The floor is yours. The perspective from a national agency and the Fondo Mexicano, which the GEF very early on had some role to play there. So I'd like to hear from you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo, and good afternoon. Well, in the last 3 decades, hand in hand with multi and bilateral agencies, 27 environmental funds have been created and consolidated in Latin America. We're close to the ground, we know the dynamics, and we also know the culture of our countries. Our objective is to transform financial resources into natural resources with the highest capillarity to reach every corner with a long-term vision. In Mexico, FMCN has implemented 4 GEF projects in the last 24 years. We're also the first direct access entity in Mexico by the Green Climate Fund. With the technical leadership of the National Institute of Ecology and Climate Change, we just launched the complementary projects of Conecta, funded by GEF, and Rios, funded by GCF. After 2.5 years of design, we are eager to reach the field. And we learn a lot while weaving these 2 proposals together. The financial landscape is changing rapidly in response to the environmental crisis. While multi and bilateral funds have been vital in responding to international commitments, we now have the opportunity to unite grants with new mechanisms, such as impact investment and offsets. Both come from the private sector and operate at different speeds and scales. Deploying private instruments together with grants is a daunting task that requires both undoing and doing. What does this mean? Let's start with undoing. Many here will agree that the number of requirements in multilateral funding is historically high. Complex rules derived from government loans for infrastructure are applied to small grants to communities. Proportionality is key. GCF is addressing this successfully with direct access entities, many of them launched with GEF funds. Harmonizing requirements will expedite funding, thus lowering the risk of decoupling multilateral from private instruments. In terms of doing, having created successful national financial institutions, we need large implementing agencies to play a new role in this ecosystem. In an increasingly polarized world, scaling impact poses the challenge of uniting sectors, as Carlos Manuel said earlier today. We need experts in political strategy with experience and deep cultural understanding to navigate these complex landscapes. Instead of supervising burdensome requirements, today's focus needs to create and strengthen critical connections. International agencies can increase capacities of direct access entities. UNEP is already working with us on articulating national initiatives with GEF funds to reach larger scales. For the sake of the planet, let's articulate funds and let's do it right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, René. And I'll call on one last agency, who is a national agency from Brazil, Fumbio, which was actually created with support of the GEF maybe 20 years ago. And now it's an accredited agency of the GEF and the GCF. So Fabio, can you tell us what your insights are on this question that we're discussing here? Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Gustavo. Well, we are kind of a success story of the GEF because we started as a GEF project and then became a GEF executing agency in Brazil and then an implementing agency, a national implementing agency, now a GCF implementing agency too. So you must be aware that we are going to take over you in a couple of years. And And so that's the plan. And we welcome all integration. I mean, we all know how complex it is to design these projects. And everyone wants to take complementary projects and use the same frameworks. In our case, kind of a little more easy because we already designed our process, just like you probably, to have the same environmental and social safeguards frameworks. Is the same for the GF and the GCF. But the results-based management and the targets and the programming, if this can be more complementary, it's going to be much easier, and the transaction costs are going to be easier, and the time that we heard here from Timor-Leste and Albania is going to be quicker to reach the ground. So I think this is very welcome, and we are eager to start.
Very good, Fabio. Thank you, and thanks for agreeing to come at the very last minute and surprise appearance. I just was informed that Alberto Saavedra was the president of the Consejo de Administración of Fundo Americano is here with us. And your perspectives would be most welcome if you were willing to just say a few words because we are getting close to the end. There's a microphone here.
With pleasure. I think it's extraordinary that the two funds are now joining efforts, but I have to say something. I mean, today is a day of party, but the time is of the essence, and we don't have a lot of time for partying. I heard something that's quite common here. We need to simplify the operation with the funds. That's an urgency. We have been very successful working both with the GEF and the GCF. In the Green Climate Fund in Mexico, which is like the 12th biggest economy. We have 126 million people. We are the 5th most biodiverse country in the world. And there are only 2 agencies accredited in the GSF. One is a national entity. It's the biggest development bank. It's part of the government. They have a lot of resources. We were the first one, a little tiny NGO. The amount of documents that we produced to be able to be accredited, it was 2.5 years in a foreign language. English is a foreign language. I speak Spanish. And we said, people, and we kept, come on, guys, we have 10 years to save the planet. If every entity is going to use 2.5 years, and now that they are joining, I hope that they will have no to deal with the 2 bureaucracies, but with only one procedure for all. So my begging, because it's really a begging, is please, guys, we don't have time. We have been very successful. The 2 institutions are pillars in this planet. Let's help us because we need more people on the field. There are many, many people committed now on the fields, on the lands, on the oceans. They want to protect all the youngsters, the kids. They are there, but they need the sophistication, the knowledge, and most of all, the monies. So please help us. And we are very proud of our association with the 2 institutions. Thank you so much. I love, for example, what I heard today from Albany and Timor-Leste. I mean, they are tiny countries, but they are incredibly wonderful on biodiversity. They are claiming help, not only monies, knowledge, experts, science, people. The solution is within the peoples. Thank you so much and for giving this opportunity.
Thank you. As a moderator here, I couldn't have asked for a better synthesis of what we had. So you made my job, totally relevant from now to the end of this. So we now have, we're going to go back to our fearful leaders, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, and hopefully Yannick is going to join us in a moment to reflect on what you heard. How are we going to get there?
So you can stay there. You can stay there, please. So Fabio, Fumbio es lo más grande del mundo, huh? And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And we took note of everything. As a matter of fact, everything that you had said reinforces the beginning of this conversation, because GEF Green Climate Fund has been collaborating for years. But we don't need to collaborate, we need to complement. And complement is not just being able to support with a long-term vision on the country, but also being more efficient. And we need to optimize and maximize the taxpayers' resources that we use. That's extremely clear. Extremely, extremely important in the context of what we do. But also, let me add something else in this important perspective. If we bring together what our funds contribute financially on an annual basis, we allocate just 5% of the global climate funds, 5%. And you know, Yannick, myself, we can do good and double the size of our trust funds, that will be 10%. That will never be enough. That is why having the country's perspective on how our funds are triggering, are a catalyzer investment in processes that, one, helps the country phase out all the negative investments and subsidies and policies that contribute to climate change and biodiversity loss and pollution, one. And second, helps the country optimize and maximize the very scarce domestic resources that are already being invested in climate adaptation and climate mitigation. Because we just mobilize 5% of the global funds. Who mobilizes the large climate funds? Every single country to their national budgets. Nevertheless, today, all countries invest more in financial activities that contribute to climate change and make us more vulnerable than what we invest to mitigate the climate change. This joint effort looks towards working with countries in dealing with that perverse system, and also will help us mobilize domestic resources in a more efficient and allowing us to maximize. Because all countries invest, even the poorest of the poorest nation invest in climate change. Many of them just invest in the repair of the damages, but they invest. And these are monies that are not going for health and education. So in that context, as Yannick said, this joint effort for complementarity is a moral imperative. It's a moral imperative, and we need to be accountable to the taxpayers that contribute to the resources that we have in our funds. So thank you so much. This is the beginning of a new process. We look forward to engage strongly with the countries, with the agencies, with the stakeholders, so we can have the highest impact in the shortest time possible. Yannick?
Carlos Manuel, you have spoken on behalf of both GEF and GCF. And on my side, I would like simply to thank all of you for joining us. Thanks all our panelists. It was really great to have this event. And let's hope that it's only the beginning of a conversation. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.